Shifting demographics, the hidden derailer of the Thai economy. For the past 2 years, we've been very much preoccupied with COVID, and it's acted as a mask over the real underlying issue here in Thailand. Demographics, the workforce of the future. Thailand was actually doing relatively well if we use GDP as a measure in the past 10 years or so. Growing GDP per capita, all looking great. And then COVID came along, and clearly a number of businesses began to struggle. Not everything, though, was positive. There was the Thailand wealth gap, where we were, as Thailand, one of the largest wealth gaps in the world between rich and poor. And what's worse is that Thailand actually has one of the highest levels of household debt, around 95% of GDP in 2022. This at a time when inflation is going to appear and interest rates potentially go up. The poorest in society are going to suffer most. So what's going to happen over the next few years? Another is Thailand tourist arrivals. Everyone's familiar with the tourism industry here. Thailand really grew to fame on the international stage because of tourism. COVID arrives, it drops to the bottom. So it's understandable that everyone really has gone back to basics and thinking about the future and how they overcome COVID. But that's not the real issue. COVID has merely been an accelerator. Poor strategies, poor business strategies have failed quickly. I suspect those companies would have failed anyway in the next 5 years or so. Those that had embraced technology, such as online retail, they grew really quickly. Look at the number of Grab motorbikes we see delivering out there on the street today. Food Panda and others. Look at the amount of shopping that is done online now. Look how companies have changed their approach to interacting with their clients. It's all changed. Those that embrace quickly have actually done really well during COVID. So not everyone's done badly. Employee expectations have changed. People retreated away from COVID, became very fearful of COVID, and now their expectations on returning to the workforce, if they return, have also changed. It's often hidden under the Great Resignation, and we'll talk more about that shortly. Other points from COVID is the rich actually got richer at a faster rate during COVID than they were beforehand. And at the same time, the acceleration of the poor becoming poorer also happened. So the gap got wider. There were international tensions as we had different strategies about resolving COVID or reacting to COVID around the world. Should we have lockdowns? Should we wear masks? Should we just let it come through? It all caused problems. And on the world stage, other international tensions also grew. And we're left now with supply chain issues and a big fear of inflation. Returning to the new norm, now that we can say COVID is perhaps almost under control or part of our futures. People have changed, as I mentioned earlier, and we have the Great Resignation. Hybrid working is becoming much more common. Many employees are not returning to the jobs they had prior to COVID. They've either found something else they enjoy doing, or alternatively have decided they don't want to work so hard, or as many hours, or travel as much. And so their expectations about reward and work have also changed. Looking forward, we also have now a lack of skilled labour to react to the new markets post-COVID. I often hear of people also talking about the quiet quit. This is where people may be carrying on with the jobs they had before, but not working as hard or not doing the extra hours and just doing the 9 to 5 as requested and the bare minimum. Things have changed with our workforce, and employers and business have to change going forward. But this does not tell the whole story. Going back in history a bit to 1950, Thailand had a population of about 20 million people. Today, the population in Thailand is 70 million. It's grown quickly. In fact, between the years of 1963 and 1983, the birth rate in Thailand was 1 million babies a year, at a time when the population was much smaller. Today, that equivalent figure is less than 600,000 births per annum. In addition, the age gap between generations is getting wider. So actually, if we look back at Thailand's growth, we can actually see it correlates well with the birth rates. Essentially, we have got a growing population that has come through into the workforce at a time when people needed people in the factories for tourism and a whole range of other activities. It actually helped generate the Thailand we have today. But the challenge for us going forward is birth rates are falling. Out of the population now, for every 100 people between the age of 15 and 65 in the workplace, they are supporting 42 people either younger than 15 or older than 65. And this number is set to worsen at quite a rapid rate going forward. In fact, Thailand is fast moving as one of the oldest aging populations in the world, way faster than the rest of Asia Pacific, and perhaps trailing in the wake a little bit of Japan. So looking forward, we know that the aged population is not only getting bigger, but living longer, and that the workforce that's following behind is getting smaller. This has a number of consequences, and I think it's also reinforced by urbanization. Back in 2000, around 31-32% of the population was urbanized. The rest was, as we term it, in agriculture or wider. And what's happened is that this population has moved into our cities and become urbanized. That actually fed and grew a growing middle class here in Thailand. And that growing middle class also helped drive the growth of the economy here. This trend of urbanization is only going to continue. And it also reinforces a cultural change in Thailand, where we used to have multi-generational families living together. We now have families split up, and therefore the demands and needs for those people going forward are going to be very different in the past. And when it comes to looking after the aged in society, they're not going to be able to rely solely upon a family environment for that to be achieved. So let's quickly talk about some definitions, and the one I'm going to focus on is the super-aged society. 21% of the population is 65 years and older, and we are rapidly moving to that point. And in fact, by 2060, around 31.5% of the population will be over 65 years of age. This provides opportunity, and I'll come to that soon, but it also provides significant challenges if we don't address that problem early. So let's do a quick recap of the principal points I'm referring to. Population in Thailand now is over 70 million. The fertility rate, as it's often referred to, is 1.5. Now, if we want to keep the population at the same level and the same spread, we'd need a replacement level of 2.1. Thailand, as I've said, is 1.5 and falling. That reinforces this reducing workforce that's following up from this big bulge of population that has driven the Thai economy in the past 20-25 years. What's worse is our fertility trend shows us that it's been below 2.1 since 1995. Life expectancy. With better healthcare, with better health facilities, better medicines, people are living longer. We certainly know the wealthier you are more likely to be associated with a longer life than the less well-off in society. But on average here in Thailand, a male can be expected to live for, at the moment, on average, 74.2 years, and a female 81.3 years. These numbers will only go up. And if you assume they're going to retire at 65 or something around that gap, then you have got to fund their retirement for aged care, aged facilities and healthcare post-65. Let's talk about that in a minute. Our urban population has gone over 51% or over 50% for the first time. And age dependency, as I said earlier, for every 100 workers, we have 42 people being supported by them. If we look forward a few years, that 42 is going to be a much higher number. So there is an impact, and Thailand needs to change. For a start, it's not about cheap labour here in Thailand anymore when you look around the region. If you want cheap labour, you go to Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, India. So we can't compete on just cheap labour. We have to look at productivity of the workforce. How are we going to get people more productive and more productive at work in generating for business and for the economy? This is matched by the fact that there is going to be a lack of labour to come into the marketplace to do this work. So we're going to have to expect people to do more. Employment law, which is very necessary and has served this country so well over the years, unfortunately now is acting as a bit of a hindrance. It's stopping mobility, it's stopping people moving. Essentially, long service accumulates a liability for a company, making it expensive to lay those staff off, but it provides also a pension pot for the employee. That's great. The negative is it just reinforces people working in old ways with low productivity and stops the change in society and the workforce that this country needs, which is greater employee mobility and greater skills up-learning. And this skills up-learning doesn't just exist in the working population. It will actually start by how we teach and how we train. And there is a need to move from rote learning to more inquisitive learning so that our workforce is able to deal with challenges and the needs of the modern world without just going back and following a rule book about how we do things. But it's not just about hardness, challenge, it's all desperate, let's pack up and go home. Actually, this change will create a massive amount of opportunity. There are huge changes and opportunity within the aged population. They have money to spend. They've created wealth during their employment. This money will be spent on healthcare, aged care facilities. How unreasonable is it to think of hospitals or hotels actually moving into an aged care environment to provide better care? What about the technologies that we see out there today that can be used to drive new ways of working and this new business environment, this new client environment for business? Also, I'm very praising of government here with the Biocircular Green Drive and Thailand 4.0. They've identified very clearly what's needed in the future. Medical and wellness appearing very high on that. Technology appearing very high. Sustainability very high on the agenda. But it's the roadmap from where we are today to get to this point that's going to be critical and what is missing. And there are clearly a number of benefits if we make their move into the BCG or Thailand 4.0 environment. So, in conclusion, where do I stand? Actions to be taken by government. We need to change the education methods here in Thailand and move from rote learning to more inquisitive education. We need to modernize the employment law, keeping in the good bits that protect lower paid people and employees in general, but allowing an increase in mobility so they can move around and deliver the modern needs of modern business, which will move in cycles of 5 or 7 years and change. This in itself will require ongoing skills training, and the government could provide an infrastructure for that all the way up to 65 years of age and past. For foreign workers, yes, we can allow some foreign workers in. It's not the total answer. The real answer lies in educating people here in Thailand on the needs of the future, rather than just bringing in another workforce from another country. And if we are to allow more in, they should be skilled people. Taxation, going back to the 142. 100 people working, looking after 42. That means the tax they pay funds and keeps 42 people who are outside the workforce. As this gets worse, taxation will need to be reviewed and put in the right way to fund aged care and healthcare for the elderly. Lastly, and most importantly, business is not outside this. We cannot look as businesses and say it's all a government challenge. It's our challenge as well. Firstly, incorporate innovation and technology into your business. Robotics, AI, it's got to exist. Define your employee value proposition. How are you going to attract and retain people? As I said earlier, their needs have changed. Retraining and upskilling, absolutely essential, because the needs of the workforce, what we expect as businesses of our employees, will continue to evolve and change year after year. Keep people up to skills so that they can be productive and earn good salaries. Target some training on core business needs right now. Make sure people understand right now what's needed in the next month, 2 months, 5 months. So they've got the right skills to do what you need now, set against an overall employee value proposition that develops the individual for the long term. Importantly, focus on what is core to you and outsource anything that isn't. Don't dilute your management efforts by doing things that aren't essential. Outsource your marketing, outsource transactional accounting, outsource anything that isn't absolutely core to your focus on the client. Outsourcers can really provide a flexible resource to complement what you do. Make sure you've seeked out new markets and clients, and the best clients are ones that pay on time and keep you in business. And lastly, if you've not done this already, an absolute basic, get in and review your business strategy. It's not about picking up the strategy that was in place before COVID. It's actually about writing a strategy for tomorrow, remembering it's turnover for vanity, profit and cash for sanity. Thank you.